My son, Zaire, has a hole in the right side of his neck, 2 on his back, and another on his left leg, caused by an exploding bullet from an AR-15. Now I want you to picture that exact scenario for one of your children. This should not be your story or mine.
But what I did find was something no prayer will ever relieve. 2 children whose bodies had been pulverized by bullets fired at them, decapitated, whose flesh had been ripped apart, that the only clue as their identities was a blood-splattered cartoon clothes still clinging to them, clinging for life and finding none.
He shot my friend that was next to me, and I thought he was going to come back to the room, so I grabbed the blood and put it all over me.
I chose to be a pediatrician. I chose to take care of children. Keeping them safe from preventable diseases, I can do. Keeping them safe from bacteria and brittle bones, I can do. But making sure our children are safe from guns, that's the job of our politicians and leaders. In this case, you are the doctors, and our country is the patient. We are lying on the operating table, riddled with bullets like the children of Robb Elementary and so many other schools. We are bleeding out, and you are not there.
In chilling and gut-wrenching detail, doctors, parents of victims, and survivors of mass shootings recounted their stories, their experiences, to a House hearing on gun violence today. It was an emotional day of testimony, and it came as lawmakers in the House and the Senate say they are working toward legislation on attempting to reduce gun violence. CBS News' Skyler Henry has more on that.
I left my daughter at that school, and that decision will haunt me for the rest of my life.
Heart-wrenching testimony on Capitol Hill from the parents of Lexi Rubio, one of the 19 children, along with 2 teachers who were shot and killed at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Legislators also heard from Mia Cerrillo, who survived the massacre by smearing her friend's blood on herself and playing dead.
Do you feel safe at school? Why not?
Because I don't want it to happen again.
And you think it's going to happen again?
They were joined by Zanita Everhart, whose son was shot multiple times but survived the Buffalo Tops grocery store massacre.
Lawmakers who continuously allow these mass shootings to continue by not passing stricter gun laws should be voted out.
We will win.
Congressional Democrats and gun control activists gathered near the Capitol ahead of planned House votes on broad gun legislation.
These bills are focused on gun violence prevention, and most important, they're focused on saving lives.
House Republicans say the Democrats' proposals, which include a ban on large-capacity magazines and raising the minimum age to buy a semi-automatic rifle to 21, violate the Second Amendment.
Let's focus on the root of the problem, but let's not take away the ability for people to defend themselves.
We're trying to get an outcome, guys.
A bipartisan group of senators continue negotiations on their own smaller bill, which could include enhanced background checks, incentives for red flag laws, mental health, and school safety provisions.
There are still details that we need to resolve.
Democrats say they hope to reach a deal by the end of the week. Skyler Henry, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
Earlier today, Attorney General Merrick Garland announced the Justice Department will review the police response to the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. The Attorney General says he hopes it will be able to answer questions about what went wrong and provide guidance for law enforcement moving forward. CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion joins me now from Capitol Hill. Nikole, the testimony today can only be described as harrowing, but you know Congress well. I have some experience with it. We don't know exactly how many lawmakers heard it, will be read in on it. Do you think it will have, even though it was emotionally so weighty, have any effect on what's being discussed behind closed doors?
Well, look, we saw a number of lawmakers wipe tears from their eyes during this testimony today. And, I did ask some lawmakers who were in that hearing room if they feel that it will move the needle. And what, for instance, Virginia's Jerry Connolly told me is that if it doesn't, then, something's wrong. And that certainly has been the refrain that we've heard from a number of Democrats. But as you know, this is a very heated political debate. It always is every time this issue comes up. And so the reality is that even as we watch the House vote today on a very comprehensive package that would, for instance, ban high-capacity magazines and bump stocks. It would crack down on ghost guns. It would raise the purchasing age on semi-automatic weapons from 18 to 21. It doesn't stand much chance of passage here in the Senate, where, of course, there are bipartisan talks ongoing on some type of narrower solution or package or compromise proposal. So that's kind of where the rubber meets the road with this. But, you know, just in talking to a number of advocates who are trying to rally Congress around this issue, they do feel to a certain extent that this time is different. And even if they do get some type of narrow legislation in place, to them, something is better than nothing.
And Nikole, I want to talk to you about that point you just made, because it does feel to me that failure, meaning complete inaction, isn't an option. That even Republicans who have some pretty deeply embedded philosophical disagreements with Democrats are at least willing to engage, see if there's some middle ground that can be found. That will probably not satisfy Republicans or Democrats, but the idea that after Uvalde, Congress can take a long look, listen to some impassioned testimony and say, you know what, we're still going to do nothing, isn't an option.
Yeah, and I think many lawmakers here on the Hill recognize the consequences of inaction, especially when you're looking at some of these families in the face who are describing, you know, their loved ones bullet riddled, or, you know, that they had so much blood over their body that, you know, for instance, you know, one victim's relative talked about having to bring a hat to the funeral home after that Buffalo massacre because her mother's hair was so bloodied. So it's like, how do you respond to that when you're looking some of these families in the eye? But that being said, you know, I think in terms of many Republicans, while some here in the Senate appear open to compromise, they don't want to be forced against an artificial timetable. And so that is the point, for instance, that Texas Senator John Cornyn is making, that yes, we're making progress, but we may need a little bit more time on this issue. Of course, we know that he and Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy have been meeting continually with small groups of lawmakers, bigger groups of lawmakers, and again, they both acknowledge that they feel like they're making progress, but whether or not they'll be able to try to reach some type of agreement or framework by the end of the week remains to be seen.
With the details, as always, Nikole Killion, thanks so very much.
You bet.